Hello, I'm John Atack, and this is my dear friend, Hoyt Richards, and we're going to talk about attachment and trauma and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So do you want to kick off with the quotation that you just read to me? Because that was rather good.
Yeah, I thought it was great. It's by this guy, Dr. Gabor Mate, and he's actually got a documentary that's just come out all about trauma. He works a lot with addictions and things like that, and childhood trauma and how that leads. But he in this actual, it's a YouTube video I watched recently called "Why Attachment is Everything," and one of the key components of that he made was the fundamental dynamic in human life and the most important factor in the development and existence of human beings is attachment. Connection to another human being is what he would call attachment. And he said that what he means by that is that the capacity to be present with and understand and see the other human being for exactly where they are, to accept him or her for who they are, and to invite them unconditionally to be in your presence exactly the way they are. That's what love actually is.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was very profound. And I thought, because it also related to, recently I've been, kind of reinvestigating a lot of, that my past cultic relationship with this group and understanding the dynamics at play. And I was able to connect with this friend of mine who was originally my model agent, and he's now become a therapist. But I only found out recently that he had also been the model agent to the cult leader when the cult leader was a model, which put him way further back in the timeline than obviously when I had met the cult leader. And so we started to talk about it, and he had sent me this text, which I really thought was really powerful. He goes, because I'm working on a project where they're interviewing people, from that time and trying to understand how this whole thing happened. And so he talked with the people that are doing that project. And he said, after speaking with them, he said, I think they got a perspective from me that was more informative than they've gotten or probably wouldn't have, because it focused on my time with Freddie. Freddie was the cult leader, fresh from Brooklyn as an enthusiastic young Jewish boy who, by the way of the genetic lottery, was able to find his way to reinvent himself in a world where he longed to be a part of, to escape his young history. Each step was highly calculated, and the further he got from his past, the better, using everyone who could add value and acceptance. His desire to shut down Freddie Meyer, which is his born name, or his birth name, in order to become Frederick von Meers, evolved to the point where he actually believed all the lies in order to convince others, kind of a sociopathic response without remorse, guilt, or empathy. He fancied his belief using Edgar Cayce, but was modeling himself after L. Ron Hubbard. Although he would never admit it, he was a very sad and lonely man, unable to connect with others, and any form of attachment was too painful, as attachment signaled the fact that he could be abandoned and left alone as he was from his unwed 16-year-old mother, which was news to me. I wasn't even aware of that. I could go on for hours about his attachment disorder. I hope it brings perspective and deeper understanding. Let's talk soon. So that really opened a can of worms for me of trying to understand attachment and our need for, because I think so much of these groups that we get involved with, it is that need for connectivity and wanting to be seen and to see others and to be accepted and all that sort of thing. So to have someone leading the charge who's got a disorder in that area and who is kind of fostering these codependent type relationships out of a need to confront their deep abandonment issues, which are also related to the attachment disorder, I think is a great kind of explanation to understand how these people become wired the way they become wired, and how that coping mechanism, manifests into something that could become pathological or sociopathic, where they lose touch with reality from the point of view of what's real, what's not, what's truth, what's not. And whether it comes down to their own name or background. And, I came to find out that he also had a sister from this, I guess, the same man who had impregnated his mother. And then they never, I don't think they ever got married, but then she got married and he had two other sisters. So I'm very curious to see if I can actually find some of his family members might still be alive. I didn't even know he had, because the story I was told was he was orphaned at age 4 and that he was brought up by his great godmother or great grandmother or something, and kind of always suffered through this kind of almost orphan-like existence. And that's just a flat out lie. And I've had many friends who knew him in those early days that said, yeah, somewhere on the ferry ride, because I met him on Nantucket. So they said somewhere on the ferry ride from Cape Cod to Nantucket, Freddie Myers became Frederick von Meer's Dutch descent, and kind of, things went on from there. And he just created a whole ulterior life and lifestyle completely divergent from his actual true history. And so I think the idea behind the attachment is really fascinating. I'd love to get your thoughts on it, because I think it's really a clue into understanding, not only how these leaders emerge, but also how we as individuals get pulled into these groups, because we're looking for that type of activity. We're looking for love. We're looking, that attachment is something that is, he says it even later. It's because I took some notes from when I was watching what does he say? He said, he goes, as infants, we're utterly helpless. And the more helpless we are, we're more helpless than any other creature. And we stay longer that way than any other creature. So without the attachment relationship, we simply do not function. We cannot live. It's actually essential to life. So if someone's had some distorted experience within that, whether your parents were maybe rageaholics or something, that that you could not process your own anger because you saw the way they exhibited anger in such a way that was so destructive, how does that affect someone's psyche? And how does that, you suppress something in order to get the love you're seeking? And I certainly experienced that to some degree with my own parents. So I think it's a fascinating subject, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Surely. Firstly, there are different routes towards malignant narcissism, the antisocial personality, and it does seem that for many people it's because they were overwhelmed in childhood. It used to be the theory about sociopathy that it was completely a consequence of when I was first studying it in the 80s to try and understand Ron Hubbard, who evidently was antisocial in his activities. That the one hypothesis was that a child had suffered tremendous pain or anguish and had not been able to trust any adult caregiver from that moment onward. Now, that's one of the potential routes, that they didn't feel attached, they didn't feel loved. Another route, if we look at Ron Hubbard and his childhood, and putting aside, there are a lot of people who try and work backwards to what must have happened to him. My work is what did happen to him and what I can prove, because speculation can be, that's how cults form, because of speculation.
Right, exactly.
And he appears to have had, from the interview we have with Margaret Roberts, who is his aunt, she's 8 years older than was 8 years older than him. But he lived in the same house as her for some years. And it seems to have been a very happy environment. It was his maternal grandfather's house. They had a great time, and it was a very loving family. And so you don't find that with Hubbard, that whatever happened to him didn't come from, as far as from I looked into it fairly deeply over the last 40 years, didn't come from that. But it probably did come from temporal lobe epilepsy. So there's a specific condition,
which Yuval Laura talks about a lot, right?
It was Yuval who first brought the idea to me, and when we first met in 2015 in Toronto, he gave me the 18 criteria of the Bear-Fideo characteristics list. Now, you don't have to have all 18, temporal lobe epilepsy is basically you have a lesion or, a cut, let's say, in the temporal lobe, so that you don't process in the same way that other people do. Such people are prone to extreme religious experiences. They have profound transcendent states. They tend to be hypergraphic. They write a lot. L. Ron Hubbard, of course, is listed as the world's most prolific writer in the Guinness Book. Though I think there was a certain amount of cheating into getting him there, but we won't get into that. He certainly did write a lot. I wouldn't recommend reading any of it. But so there are all sorts of reasons, but I do strongly believe that for many people, it is a failure of attachment in childhood that leads them either to want to become authoritarian and tell other people what to do and believe that they are party to some kind of special esoteric knowledge,
right?
Or pretend that they are. But also attachment issues can cause people to want to be connected. Now, again, I come from a very secure attachment as a child.
Right.
I had 3 older brothers who were great and didn't bully me more than was necessary. And my mum was wonderful. My dad was, probably would have been classified as having PTSD after, Dunkirk, the Normandy landings, and the relief of Belsen, which he'd experienced, and having grown up in a household with a malignant narcissist as a mother and an absent father. But he nonetheless was a clever and friendly, if somewhat withdrawn human being. So I consider that I had a good childhood. I'm one of the 2% of families, the non-dysfunctional families.
I don't qualify, but I'm happy to hear it does happen.
Yeah, but exactly as you say, we're all looking for love. We're all looking, and the problem is that pro-social people who are looking to do something good in the world are attracted by the lies of antisocial people who are looking to lure you into fulfilling their desire for power and control over others. I mean, I think there is a fairly usual aspect of authoritarian cult leaders, which is they like to enslave people.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And then I would add to that, there's usually a fascination with the so-called magical thinking, and that's a huge part of the ploy, right? I mean, that not only are you looking for connection, but then you're also looking for this almost otherworldly experience that takes you out of whatever the painful reality you've grown up in, or that you feel you want to be released from, something that borders on utopian, or something that sounds like, the basic premise being that the world's gone awry and we know how to fix it. And what it can be is so far beyond what you can imagine. It's very, that's why I say the older I get and the more I see what's going on in the world today, sometimes I feel like, The Matrix was the documentary. I mean, it feels like that sometimes, we're the ability for us all to be so indoctrinated seems to be, and I mentioned this actually to Steve Hassan one time. We were speaking recently. I said, I wonder, because I feel like after, going through my own process and trying to evaluate things and make sense of it all, and also being privy to work in some cases and helping families, get their kids out of cultic relationships and situations or groups or things, and watching kind of, even though you have family dysfunction and you have, I think most families are kind of, it's impossible not to have some level of that. But given a common enemy, a family can quite often align itself in a way that do something really productive and actually potentially pull someone out of a really destructive situation.
Yes.
And I think that's been incredibly healing for me personally to witness, and in some way feel a constructive part of that, because somehow my experience has given me a lens and can be a potential resource to those kind of trying to understand the dynamics at play, because I can just relate to what my experience was, and that can sometimes be useful. And also talking to the people who are indoctrinated, I can identify kind of where they are, because, you know, like you and I, we were both there, so I don't fault them, you know. And it's interesting from the point of view that I feel like that we as humans almost kind of come in with and it comes back to this attachment thing, you know. There's like a very core kind of need to be a part of something, and to be in, like, there's safety in numbers, and we're drawn to this whole kind of the survival is going to be by being associated with a group, you know, in a sense, or some sort of, you know, means of safety. And so we're kind of predisposed to follow, and from that point of view, to become a leader in your own life, and if you have any interest potentially leading others, you really have to, number one, acknowledge that that is kind of the pre-programming that's in place. And to overcome it, the first step is at least acknowledging that's there, and that if you want to do something else, that you have to learn to work with that pre-programming that's kind of in place, that can certainly be put in a different space than if it's operating unconsciously, which is what it seems to be for most of us. But that is how we end up in these situations where we're just, it feels right, it feels natural to go follow, and it's kind of the line of least resistance, and kind of you know, it's kind of dressed usually in some form of a shortcut, like because we're special, or because we feel we've been given this special opportunity because of our own specialness, that we're, you know, we don't have to do what everyone else does to figure it all out. We're given this kind of shortcut, and that's incredibly appealing and attractive, and it works in, you know, congruence with this kind of pre-programming. So I mean, do you agree with that kind of, that we have that predisposition?
Yes, how we interpret it, I think is interesting. When I left Scientology, because we were so, we very much turned against anything that began with the prefix psych. So psychology, psychotherapy, psychiatry, and it meant that rather than immediately, and within the year I was reading books on neurology, so I was a very bad child. But my first attempt to interpret what had happened was through zoology rather than psychology. So I read Eugene Morais, The Soul of the White Ant and The Soul of the Ape, the first books of scientific zoology, where he'd actually gone around about 1900 and observed these animals and seen what they did. And he came up with all sorts of ideas. And I started thinking of the leaders, the authoritarians, as rogue animals. You know, they were
interesting, kind of like a almost a mutant.
Yeah, so you have like a rogue elephant that will not be part of, or I mean, male tigers of their nature are rogues. They will eat their own cubs. They live separately. They don't have a family life. Human beings we are dependent upon others. So I don't think it's even necessarily a matter of following. It's a matter of joining, being social, being in society. Our driving force, I believe, and this is something that I introduced to Yuval Noah, who has developed this astonishing, as we know, view of human belief.
Right.
But the thing that wasn't there in his original form was infatuation. That as human beings, we want to fall in love. That's what we want to be doing. We want to fall in love with objects, so we'll buy them from Amazon and be bored with them by the time they arrive. With people, we want to have that feeling, that buzz.
That's right.
Doesn't matter how rational you get or how great your critical thinking faculties are. If somebody offers you that buzz, there's no fool like an old fool. It doesn't matter how old you get. When somebody offers you something, then it'll give you that feeling. And I think that, that's the sense of novelty. It's having something new to think about, to do. If we understand that about ourselves, and if we understand that friendship, if we put aside attachment, love,
right,
let's say friendship, having a conversation such as the conversation we're having,
Right.
means that here we are right now in the present, enjoying ourselves, and with our hackles not risen, and collaborating with other people. So my great friend Ira Chalef has written for years about courageous followership and the notion that some people are leaders and some people are followers. I don't think of myself as either of these things particularly. I think, I like people and I get on with that. What you said about the Matrix, I'm going to reflect on because I'm told, and I've never read it, I'm told that Immanuel Kant put forward the idea that there is the world outside and then there is the interpretation of the world in which we live. Korzybski would later on say the map is not the territory. We live in the map. We live in our expectations and our interpretations and our perceptions, each one of us in our own matrix.
Right.
And that can then overlap with other people. Looking at at the moment, I'm studying the occult roots of Nazism, as we all should. And
little light subject, yes.
It's an amazing thought that the most simplistic, idiotic idea underlies what the Nazis believed. And that is Mme Blavatsky putting forward the idea that there was a culture called Lemuria, of which there are no records anywhere. It's completely made up. And what happened was the Aryan people, there's that word, started breeding with other racial types. Miscegenation, as it's called.
Oh, so is that the first time the Aryan word's really mentioned? I mean, is it really the root?
No, it actually comes out of it's an interpretation of the Aryan people. The Aryan people are meant to be the Indo-Europeans of Iran and India who, according to linguistic theory, until relatively recently when this was challenged, there's this idea that there's a root people who are Iranian, Persian, Indian.
So is the Aryans considered the original or the chosen? Like what makes them the?
Mme Blavatsky kind of moves them out of history into prehistory, into fantasy,
right?
Area, but she then posits that they were demigods. They had godlike powers, and they lost these powers because they bred with people who didn't have magical powers. And the idea that underlies Nazism is the regaining of these powers. Now, to anybody who's been involved in Scientology, this is a very scary thought, because Hubbard was saying, we've all got magical powers and we just have to unlock them, which is, Hitler was only promising that to the Aryans. Hubbard was, had a broader church, you might say, and was willing to offer it to anybody who'd got the money.
Anybody willing to pay. Yeah, exactly.
But this idea that you can therefore create a matrix by putting a belief forward, and now you're a part of the elite that has this esoteric knowledge, and you're one of the electoi, you can be above the rest of humanity. These attractive ideas of, so I think there are 4 forms of attachment that are listed in John Bowlby and Margaret Ainsworth's scheme of attachment, which is the psychological scheme. And my friend Alex Stein, who I think her interview should be up before this one, I talked with her about her lovely book, Terror, Love and Brainwashing. And she was a member of a socialist group in the US. She's English, but ended up over there. Mm-hmm. And it was pseudo-socialist. She corrected me quite properly when I called it socialist. Pseudo-socialist, pseudo-communist. It was actually a cult, and a destructive cult. But she says that the relationship between the follower and the leader in such a situation is a disorganized attachment, which you would see in a parent who would say, I love you, I love you, I love you, come here, and then hit you when you arrive.
Right.
And it's the person you go to for comfort and support who then terrorizes you. And that is a normal relationship within such a group. Certainly, I didn't suffer that in Scientology, but then I never met Ron Hubbard. Having interviewed many people who did, he used to scream his head off at them, chuck them overboard, put them in the chain locker. He did awful things to them. And yet they will come to me years later and say, he was compassionate. And I'm kind of going, no, he made a show for people so he would seem compassionate, but he actually really didn't like people. He was, I think, unattachable. And
Right. Exactly. So it's an attachment disorder, right? I mean, it really is. They that's why they foster these weird codependent destructive relationships, like you're saying, and it's very much the Stockholm syndrome, right? I mean,
yes,
where
that's
the
what I wrote on my little notepad when we were talking before.
yeah, because the abuser now defends the abusee defends the abuser, right? I mean, and that's been my experience. Like just recently I reconnected with a guy from my group, because the group basically does not exist anymore. I sued them back in, I think it was 2002. I had been the primary financer of the group, so they were sitting on assets that it was a fraction of what I invested, but the remaining assets I had basically was the cash cow that brought that about. So I was penniless, and I'm like, screw this. I'm going to at least get some money back. And I'm not comfortable with them sitting in a house that I paid for, that running businesses that I had invested in, supposedly. And basically sued them and took them down, which was awesome. And it was kind of beneficial from that point of view of feeling like I faced my demons and kind of came away with some like a Pyrrhic victory of sorts. But it allowed me to kind of just move forward, because I think a lot of people can get caught in that phase of, once you've gotten through identifying your group is terrible, then you sometimes feel responsible to try to stop them. And a lot of times these groups are so large, you just can't do that, like Scientology right now. I hope and pray in our lifetime that group comes down and before our eyes. But
it's a lot smaller than most people think. It's probably about 25,000 members now.
But it's got assets in the billions, right? So that's what you're up against. I think they're probably deep pockets. So, but it's interesting that how it kind of allowed me to move on into my kind of recovery path and really focus on getting my life back together. So reconnecting with someone who from back in that time has chosen not, in essence, to deal with the traumatic effects of the abuse, and speaking to them only recently, and hearing them kind of taking this approach of turning it all into is just this has been another step on my spiritual path. I learned so much from the Freddie, the leader, and this and all of that, kind of painting this picture of how this was the greatest thing, and he's found such solace in making sense of it. And he's had a successful business doing some certain things. And so I told him, I said, I have to kind of ask you then. I go, because I said, I think this guy was a very complex individual, but I would say one of his main attributes was deception.
Yeah.
And so this guy I'm talking to says, well, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, let's start with his history, in the sense that his name, his background. He found out none of these things that he ever told any of us were truthful. I said he then had a covert drug use, that he was not upfront about. He had a covert sex life. He ended up getting HIV and AIDS and lying, never admitting that. And we, as his loyal servants, going around and he had when he was dying, had a massive bed sore, and we had to literally change that wound every night for months on end until he was dying, having no idea that we were putting ourselves at potential risk. And I said, that to me is pretty deceptive.
Not a nice man.
Yeah. And he goes, well, he was human. He was human. I'm like, well, listen, I'm going to have to agree to disagree with you here, because there's plenty of humans that do not behave like that. And for humans that do behave like that, I got a problem with. So, but I could just see he could not process this. And I could see no one's pushed back on him in 2 decades on this point of view that he's held. And I don't know if that conversation made any inroads or not, but it was remarkable to watch. And it was almost uncomfortable to be around, because I felt like I was going back in time to literally 2 decades ago of encountering the mind thought or the group think of why I escaped from that group. And yet here we are 2 decades later, and it's like no time had passed. So it just seems like these type of wounds, if left unchecked, it's like you're stunted. You are like stuck in time. And I think that was remarkable and almost disturbing to witness. I mean, I was very grateful to be on my side of the table, having the conversation coming from me than where his was. But I mean, that to me is again, this is kind of that Stockholm, syndrome type of thing. Not wanting to, and we've talked about this in the past, that, the rubber hitting the road of the humility to admit yourself on some level that you, in essence, got taken or conned on some level. And that part of that involved not only someone being deceptive, but also being really fucking abusive and not being able to acknowledge that because you want to focus on the positive. And I'm not saying there weren't positives. I mean, you and I have talked about this before. I think one of the most important questions when you try to, deconstruct these stories is to have someone answer, well, why did you stay? The really kind of uninformed, ignorant question that gets asked more often is, why did you just leave? Mm-hmm. And that's a really, really unhealthy. That's like, I try to, when someone presents that, I said, what that's kind of like? I said, that would be like me being very vulnerable and admitting to you that I had been raped when I was 21. And then you turn to me and go, well, what were you wearing that day?
Yeah.
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 I mean, it's like, well, what are you talking about? That has nothing to do with what. So, it just only shows the person, and listen, I was as ignorant as anyone getting involved in this thing. So I'm sure I would have asked those same questions if I hadn't gone through this experience. I don't fault someone in that way, but I really do hope that we can shift the gears to kind of look at these things in a more consistent light, so that we all kind of start speaking the same language and understand the dynamics at play, because these are extreme versions of relationships that we all get involved in that are much more subtle but have the same power dynamics at work. And that Stockholm thing happens. There's a lot of people on these one-on-one cultic relationships where someone's been really abusive to them, like you're saying earlier, and someone just saying, oh, well, it was all, Ron Hubbard was compassionate though, when this person had been flat out abused by them. So I think it's fascinating to me. It's and again goes back to the bigger picture of the trauma and the attachment of if you do not deal with the forces at play and the wounds that you suffered, then you literally stay stuck in time. And that is a fascinating case study to present to people, to say, here's your choices. You can either choose to deal with the things that happen and have the humility, like we've talked about, to admit that on some level, maybe you got victimized. People hate that word, but I think that's a huge word to kind of first accept, to move towards going from victim to survivor to someone I'd like to call a thriver. I think that's the process, but you have to first, get to that point. Like, you did not sign up for that,
Yeah. And asking, why didn't you leave? Let's rephrase it. Why didn't you betray those ideals?
Yeah, right. Right.
There are different words for looking at this. And it's like saying somebody who's got married, well, why didn't you leave your wife or your husband, your spouse,
right.
When they got angry with you? Or it's all a matter of, how much significance you place upon the relationship. And we do. Good people, when they've invested in a relationship, will do everything they can to save it.
Right. To really stick it out. No, absolutely.
And
I think that
it does come to, a Stockholm syndrome, where we fail to see aspects of our own character and our own behavior. We hide ourselves from ourselves to maintain these attachments, these negative, destructive attachments. And once it's how much value, Franklin's idea of, pro and contra. You have a sheet of paper, you draw a line down. I think it was him who came up with this first. and you say what's good and what's bad about something, and then you assign a point value to each thing and add it all up and see where you are. And one of the things that I've seen from that, when I'm going to say it because he's gone, I had a friend who'd voted for Donald Trump, and he told me that he could prove that Hillary Clinton had been directly involved in 14 murders. And so when I put it to him, well, but the day after he was elected, when he was asked about the special prosecutor for Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump's response was, and I quote exactly, the Clintons are good people. So why isn't, if he knows that she's committed 14 murders, why isn't he pursuing that if he is who you think he is? And I said, please go away, divide a piece of paper, pros and cons, about Donald Trump. And I don't think he did. But the point is that if you have all pros and no cons, or all cons and no pros, you either are dealing with somebody who is a vicious psychopath, or a tremendous saint, and I've not met many of them. Not many of them so far, actually. Keep looking. The Archbishop of Crete was pretty close, actually. He was pretty amazing.
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
But there should be, if you feel just positive or negative about another human being, you're probably not looking at things properly. And the same is true about our own experience. When I say to people, you know, for me, leaving Scientology, the belief, I left the mother cult to set up the independent Scientologists. I was one of the people that started this damn thing in 1983. But within a few months, I was disillusioned, and my disillusionment was very easy. There was absolutely no doubt that Hubbard had lied, because I could find contradictions in his own statements. You know, I usually give what he said about his war wounds and his war record, that in different places at different times, he made different claims. The first of which was that he didn't see combat. And that was December 1950, public statement. But he got it to the point where he was crippled and blinded with injured optic nerves and physical injuries. And he does use the word physical, to hip and back from his combat. Well, I've read his war records, 800 pages of them. I've been here, I've been there. But what I found was that he lied to me. And he said, honesty is sanity. And when I put that to believers, they brush it aside. And for me, no, that's fundamental. If somebody is a liar, I cannot trust them. If I cannot trust them when they tell me that they've discovered something, I should not trust them unless there is evidence for it. And I have to look at myself in the same way, that, you know, what have I experienced? What's happened to me? What do I really feel? What's actually going on? And are my attachments to other people good? I have frequently through my life been betrayed. I've been attacked by people who I considered to be very good friends, and out of the blue, you know, and part of that certainly stirred up by Scientology's harassment campaign against me. But now, at age 66, I find myself surrounded by people like you who I know and trust and can depend on. And that is, for me, I threw away the idea of enlightenment. That was my central driving idea from the age of 17, when I first read about Zen Buddhism. And I went, studied Zen, I learned meditation, I read, you know, I've translated Lao Tzu, and very keen on all of these metaphysical ideas. But at the center, it was this idea that you could suddenly get it. You could become illuminated. It would all make sense. And from then on, you would be serene. You know, everything would make sense to you, all the horrors of the world. That lasted for me all the way through Scientology. I left Scientology when I was 28, all the way into my 50s. Until one day I went, this makes no sense. I couldn't care less. It's not about being enlightened. It's about the quality of relationship, the quality of attachment. Terrible things are going to happen to me. If I'm lucky, there will be people who help me, as there have been, my family particularly, and certain friends. and I will be there for them.
Right.
And, unless flood, famine and plague levels us all, there'll always be somebody there who can keep things going. So if I got down, and that's not something that's happened to me in a very long time, I must say, I'm very fortunate. But if I did get down, there were 5 or 6 people I could call up and talk to, and they'd make me feel better. And, the same for me. So I think, yes, we want to be joiners. I don't think it is so much that we want to be followers. And I think also understanding that our leaders are good at what they know about, possibly, though most of our political leaders seem to be idiots and half-wits, frankly. But they shouldn't be trusted to be all-knowing. This idea of the God-man or the God-woman is a ridiculous idea. And the people who put themselves forward as such, like Mme Blavatsky, or Annie Besant after her, or Mary Baker Eddy, Ron Hubbard, these people are damaged, which is where we began the conversation. Whether they're damaged at birth, whether they damage themselves, or whether it's their family or society, it is not particularly relevant. They become predators. They become people who prey upon other people. And my argument is very much that we don't need to be prey, and we certainly don't need to be predators. So, which again, Donald Trump, here he is again, he told his co-author of The Art of the Deal, Tony Schwartz, that in this world there are predators and prey. I disagree thoroughly. There are predators and prey, but we should be, by collaborating, by attaching ourselves, we should be creating situations where that's not happening. That's not part of our life and the way we are. I think it brings us to another point. I had a heartrending email a few days ago from a woman who had been involved in Scientology for a very long time. And I'm not really active in that world. I haven't been for a long time, but she contacted me and she bemoaned the lack of purpose, that having, here we were going to clear the planet. We were going to bring enlightenment to everyone. And, as I've seen it before, one day you're saving the world and the next day you're wondering if you can afford a pack of potatoes. Reality, the matrix collapses and you find yourself in reality. And I think that, often with people when they leave a group, their purpose becomes destroying that group. And I have kept away from all such people. I've never wanted to destroy anything. I've been called an anti-Scientologist. Well, no, I've done more for the benefit of Scientologists than anybody else I know. And that's always been my drive, to help people, not to scorn them or to destroy them. Even Hubbard, if I could have helped him and stopped him hurting people, I mean, he needed to be in prison, let's be fair, but I would have done that. And so I think the purpose and understanding, when I set about founding Open Minds, back in 2014 we started it up, I thought that the tens of millions of former members of authoritarian cults would flock to this one idea, which is we can offer prevention. We can offer an education to kids that will mean they don't, or they're far less ready to become involved in destructive, abusive relationships, whether on an individual or a group basis. If I'd known, the single page that I now define the human predator with, if I'd read that when I was 19, I'd never have got involved with Scientology. And I thought, people would be going, yes, let's push this thing along. I was wrong. People tend to want to do something about their own group, or just carry on with their lives. And that was tremendously frustrating for me, to spend 4 years trying to get people along. And there were people such as yourself who were, of course, helpful. But there is not this drive and understanding that the purpose of clearing the planet or saving the world. No, the idea of getting people to think, getting people to understand what is dangerous in other people, learning how to attach properly. I mean, Eric Fromm, who I direct people to at every chance, defines love as care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge. And I think developing those things as individuals, grouping together to do something about this and to help people to think for themselves and make their decisions, be better followers where they have to follow, and better leaders where they have to lead. All of these things exist, but it's for people out there to do that, because heck, I've retired. I am no longer a guru.
Well, there were a couple words that really stuck out with me. What you said earlier on was infatuation, and I think ideals, and I think they're very tied together. I mean, it's very profound for me. I love that you brought those up, because I think the infatuation process is so tied to some ideal of what we're looking for in that attachment and that love and whatever, and it's very extremist in the way it's colored or painted in our minds, and it kind of would fall into, I think, the category of being not only extremist but very black and white. Like it's like everything's wonderful or it's all evil, and that's very appealing because it sounds simple, but that is exactly how you're so controlled. Like when I for me, it's really, a lot of my recovery process has been about recognizing the shades of gray in life, and really recognizing that like you're saying, these ideals and the infatuation with pursuing like enlightenment, where I'm just going to have it all figured out, and that desire. And luckily I don't feel this way anymore, but I certainly I certainly used to say the cult leader, that desire to be right all the time, like how destructive that is on the psyche, of where you feel that you need to be heard and your point of view has to be the right one. I think all of that is so kind of demonstrating the sort of lack of balance and understanding of really how life is. But it's so enticing and it's so attractive when you're not willing, I guess, to rely more on ourselves with getting a lot of the information that you're talking about, getting the information of understanding why those things are so appealing and how they're appealing, because they're just, for the most part, really not real. And they're tied to this idea of joining, which I love, and or following something that sounds like it's going to somehow make our lives better, but doesn't empower us to figure it out, or at least have the credit to rely on our critical thinking to get there. It's, oh no, it's already been figured out, and because you're special, you get the special treatment of just having to catch up and read up and catch all the hard work that I did that explains it all. But because I really like you and think you're wonderful and fabulous, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom.
Just give me $10,000.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I mean, I think that's really, really so powerful to kind of think of it in those terms, and that desire for attachment and that desire for love is usually put in these in these terms that can only border on infatuation, which is it's like, I don't know whether it's because of we should bring a case against Disney for painting these pictures that we're all going to be look for the princess. And
he did take an awful lot of cocaine. What can I say?
I had to be the knight in shining white armor. It's like that's just, first of all, it's not real, and it's like that's undue pressure and just not actually probably facilitating healthy relationships. So but again, it's an ideal, right? And therefore it gets accepted by society, and therefore the pursuit of that gets accepted. And therefore, when you're saying this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm attracted to this person or this group, you don't realize that there's a form of self-sabotage happening, because you don't really, on some kind of I guess unconscious, or certainly not any no conscious level, realize really what you're saying. And I think that's been a strong benefit of having gone through this process, is to see the shades of gray. I mean, it was the same sort of thing like when the COVID thing first happened, and we were in the 2 weeks to flatten the curve. I don't know if you guys had that in the
Yeah,
UK.
we had lockdowns. Yeah.
So I remember walking out because the street, and listen, I know all about end of the world scenarios because that's what our cult was into. We were all into that. So I'm walking down the street and I see another guy who's like a block and a half down the street who recognizes I'm a human, freaks out and bolts to the other side of the street. And I'm like, oh my God, this is not the zombie apocalypse, but that's, and I realized that reaction, you do not usually get there on your own. That is an indoctrination process. That's a lot of fear and control to get you to the point where you have that heightened, intensity of fear that you're going to just feel like you are living. And I walked around like that for 20 years thinking the end of the world was coming. So it's really interesting to, in a moment, recognize, just because of this experience that I'd had, that there was clearly a lot of fear and fear indoctrination going on in the way this whole thing has been addressed. And that's been really interesting to kind of go through this process while this is all been going on as a global. I mean, it's the closest thing I've had to have like a war, a global event, something like that. This has really been the closest thing I've had it in my lifetime. And it's been really wild to recognize that the experience I had being in a cultic relationship with this group actually gave me the lens to see this pandemic from a whole different point of view than I would have otherwise. So there's silver linings everywhere, John. Who would have thought?
Yeah. And it is, I mean, if one has recovered and become a thriving survivor, one should want to help other people. And you and I have done a certain amount of that.
Yeah.
It amazes me how many people then just slot into being followers, jump into another cult, do things that, as you say, are self-sabotaging. The idea of apocalypse, the idea of end days, is something I've studied a great deal over the last lifetime. Starting with Norman Cohn's Pursuit of the Millennium, about the millenarian movements, particularly in the 1200s, through the Crusades leading up to that. That in fact, and he wrote a book called Cosmos and Chaos. Norman Cohn is a professor of history who I admired tremendously. I just wrote Europe's Inner Demons about the witchcraft craze. A Warrant for Genocide, in which he shows that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is an absolute forgery, undoubtedly a forgery, because the original was written 30 years before there were any Zionists. It's that simple. And then the Russian secret police just changed a few words and republished it. Bless them.
Wow.
But in Cosmos and Chaos, he talks about, this is the foundation of human society and civilization and religion. In Sumeria, this idea of the abyss, which is one of the oldest concepts in human thought, that underneath the disk of the earth, and we know it's a flat earth really, underneath the disk of the earth, there is the abyss where the shades or shadows walk, and where monsters lurk, which are seeking to break through. And therefore that leads us, the Persians, the Indians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Jews, therefore the Christians and the Muslims, have this Manichaean dualistic notion of good and evil. For me, one of the great disservices, talked about Disney now own the Star Wars franchise.
Right.
Apparently, when George Lucas arrived with the script to start shooting, the Force was not in the script. It was something that was put forward by somebody, as they started into production. Somebody else came along and said, why don't we have this, that the Sith represent the dark side and the Jedi the good side? This fundamental misinterpretation of the Daichi, which people call the yin yang, the two tadpoles.
Right.
In Chinese philosophy, the one fundamental philosophy, even Buddhism has apocalypses. The Chinese, I don't believe, and hopefully if I'm wrong, somebody will correct me in the comments, but I don't believe that they have this dualism. Their idea is that originally yang is the sunny side of the mountain and yin is the shady side. All of the other associations, male, female, what have you, come later. That originally it's the bit that gets the sunshine and bits in shadow, both of which have their advantages. not good and evil, not even
Oh,
darkness and light. And so that's why there's the dark eye in the light one and the white eye in the dark one, because they spin, they're always transforming. So this simplistic view of, black and white thinking, polarization, right and wrong, is all human societies seem to have this one way or another. The Chinese got it from the Buddhists ultimately, and then Mao Zedong really did show them good and evil. And understanding, that there are all of those shades of grey, there are those different ways of looking at something, and something that is, again, to move to Eric Fromm, something that's life affirming for me may be life denying for somebody else. When the mosquito comes and tries to affirm its life by sucking my blood, I will kill it.
Right.
I will deny it life. And however many environmentalists tell me that ecosystems depend on having lots of mosquitoes, I'm not buying it. I don't like them. So, but that's an example of an ideal. The idea.
Oh, exactly.
Disorder, and we need to be. You and I have both come to this. We need humility. More than anything, we need to be able to say, that was a stupid thing I thought, and that was a wrong thing I thought. And I think as we get older, that does, the erosion process of living, perhaps, does mean I don't need to be right all the time. I don't care, really.
No, I mean, I think the people that I consider to be the ones I respect and consider to be the brightest are the ones the quickest to say, oh, I don't know, I have to think about that, or do some research. Like that's a great point. It's the know-it-alls. I mean, that's that whole thing, the pursuit of those things, like to be right all the time, or to have figured it all. Like those are the people we can't stand in our lives. Why would you want to pursue that? And I think it's fascinating to look at that kind of behavior, because or that, again, an ideal. I think I've never really thought of it in these terms, but ideals, are just incredibly dualistic black and white thinking, and the fact that we now attribute, there's been compliments to claiming that someone's idealistic. Well, I don't know if I look at that in that way anymore. It's like I think someone who's probably idealistic could be extremely vulnerable to some really bad experiences of their life based upon those ideals, and there seems to be some inherent rigidity in those, in the pursuit of those ideals, and with that rigidity brings all sorts of problems, because you're only giving yourselves one or two channels to analyze whatever experience you're having. Like it's going to either fall on this side, it's either going to fall on the shadow side or the light side of the mountain, not recognizing that there's actually tons of shades of gray in there. And that
well, it's east and west as well, isn't there? There's not just north and south.
No, exactly. So I think it's a really, really provocative conversation that I wish would happen more often, because again, this is society kind of doing their own indoctrination of this is kind of an accepted way of thinking, and one that in essence is condoned through our education system and all these sort of things. And and like we were saying, even through history, the way, whether it's the education system, whether it's the religious system, whether it's the political system, it very much falls in this kind of very dualistic black and white thinking, and either you're for us or you're against us. That's going to be inherently problematic. And granted, the cultic situations that you or I might have found ourselves in are extreme versions of that, but boy, it's clearly obvious that subtler versions of this are just happening continually with people, and that's where the struggle is, and that's where the I think conflict in someone's own mind, and actually goes back to a little bit of we talked earlier before we got on here about the use of psychedelics. And one of the things I've experienced on psychedelics is this accepting of all those shades of gray. Like it's seeing this kind of creative force that is always here, but I only can really perceived to that extreme when I'm in the psychedelic experience, but how accepting and loving it is of all of it. And it's not, it's technicolor. It is not black and white. You know, it is very multidimensional and geometric shapes. Anything, basically anything that you can think of can kind of manifest. And the only thing that really comes through predominantly is this love, you know, this kind of, you know, whether, and it's that, you know, and I guess it goes back to what we initially started this conversation about attachment, that wanting, you know, that is what I find the appealing thing about the psychedelic experience is the connection to the what, for lack of a better, the divine love that I feel I'm experiencing when I'm in that state, and the acceptance and love I even feel towards myself, you know, warts and all. And that's really, really, for me, very healing and therapeutic. And it actually makes me consider that this is how these ancient cultures got by trying to make sense of the world we live in, is through these plant medicines, because they didn't have therapists now, and, you know, and that sort of thing like we have. So you wonder how they got by. And I think for the ones who probably were better off than most, had some sort of experience like that.
It's certainly true in some cases, but I think that the idea of amelioration, that was the word that struck me as a teenager, that I can't make things perfect. I have no sense of heaven on earth occurring, but I can act as if what I did made a difference, to quote William James, and I do. And if, you know, the reward is very simple, that, you know, I can be selfish and thrill seeking, and I think we all need to be to some extent. I think
Sure.
You know, people who get their pleasure out of hurting themselves, I think, are a little bit odd. So I'm not going to be joining Opus Dei or anything like that, or the flagellant movement. But so we do need pleasure, but the happiness consists of the feedback that we get from our attachments, where somebody says that something we said or did really helped them, really managed to blow the clouds away, and that we take part. Again, I think there's this thing that's it's set within religion, this idea of the salvation of the soul, with the idea that you as an individual will get to heaven, you as an individual will get all the goodies. Buddhists say that the last desire that you lose is the desire to become Buddha. But that we then look at it and go, well, actually, the people I respect the most, like the Archbishop of Crete, are people who give of themselves without thinking about, you're to give and not to count the cost, without thinking about, and I'm not going to do that, you know, personally, because I do count the cost, but people who give themselves to society and understand that we are part of something potentially wonderful, rather than individuating and separating ourselves out, you know. So attachment there becomes being part of the fabric of society. I am agnostic. I have no beliefs in divinity. I have no beliefs in the supernatural, which makes me very unusual. Even 70% of atheists, when surveyed, believe in magic. It's very weird. They don't believe in God, but they do believe in magic. I don't not believe in God, and I don't believe in God. I can't be bothered. Life is right now so wonderful that I don't worry about those things. So my philosopher of choice would be Zhang Tzu, who very much sort of says, well, you know, embrace the Tao and go fishing, enjoy yourself. I am going to learn about fishing. It sounds like a wonderful religious practice that I've heard about that's incredibly relaxing and doesn't harm any fish as long as you put them back. But I think that developing a philosophy of, you know, sort of a stoicism that is also, you know, is pleasure based, that one is seeking to help other people, help oneself, have a reasonable time of it, not hurt too many mosquitoes, and, you know.
And, you know, it's so interesting because, you know, as you're saying this, the images that kept coming up in my mind are these moments when I've been with friends, because again, it relates to that attachment thing, like people that I just love. I just,
Yeah.
over time, because of the friendship, whatever it may, way you categorize it, it's, there's been years, even, a lot of the friendships my longest term, like we're talking decades. I mean, way more than half my life at this point. And I just, at times, when I am with those type of friends, and I just have this kind of conscious awakening of just feeling this love for them,
Yeah.
and this gratitude of just being in their company. And that's when I feel most alive and most connected to my life. Right. I mean, that is like, it's that simple for me. Like, I'm like, this is what it's about for me. Just spending time and holding space with people that I love and I feel loved by. Like, that to me is when I really feel alive.
Yes.
And whether you want to call that a divine, I mean, I'm not into labels either. So it's like, to me, but that is where I feel like, oh, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That's where I feel most at peace. And just, in that moment, my attitude is gratitude. And I'm like, this is awesome. I just don't want to be anywhere else. And I don't want to be anyone else. I'm just grateful to be here with these people that I truly, in my, heart of hearts, love. And I think that's, an incredible awakening for me. Like it doesn't need to be a lot more complicated than that.
No,
it really
doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. That's the cure for our ills, and that's what we're, if we're here for anything, and I'm not sure that we are, then that's it. I remember years ago reading, it was the last statement of a physicist. I can't remember who. I don't think it was Richard Feynman, but it was somebody, relatively famous, who said that after in his 80s, he's about to die, and what he has realized through all of his achievements and all of his study is the most important thing in human life is quite simply love. Or as Captain Beefheart put it, the stars up above are running on love and they're winking at you.
I love it. I love it.
Okay, perhaps with that thought, we will end our confabulation.
Yes, I love that. That was a fun talk. I appreciate that, John. I always enjoy our talks, and I really love your input. And as always, I learned a ton. It's fantastic. I'm very grateful.
No, it's always very stimulating for me. It makes me think, and that's a very good thing indeed. So I'm John Atack, my guest, Hoyt Richards, and we will see you again soon.
All right. Cheers.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.
Because I really like you and think you're wonderful and fabulous, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom.
Just give me $10,000.
Yeah, exactly.